Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your Excellencies, dear friends, good afternoon to you all. And allow me to start by thanking our gracious hosts, our brother in Bahrain, for putting together this, as the intro just said, very, very timely meeting to search for solutions to the many problems that continue to afflict our region. And of course, grateful again to my dear friend John Chipman and my colleagues and friends in the IISS, and I've had a long friendship with the Institute. And thank you again, sir, for making this happen despite COVID and despite the many challenges that we all have. And I think this speaks to the commitment of the Institute and Bahrain to make sure that we do come together for a very necessary conversation on what we do next. And I'm honored to be in the company of my dear friend, Minister Fuad Hussein, and our friend Dr. Muhib as well, for what I know and hope will be a very direct and straightforward conversation. Title of our session is Conflict Resolution in the region. And if I look at the list of conflicts that we have from the pandemic, which is new, but it is a challenge to all of us, to conflicts in Palestine, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, tension in the Gulf, I would say we haven't really done a great job conflict resolving in this part of the world. I think the past decade or so has witnessed more conflicts than it saw breakthroughs towards solving them. And this drives me to say that key to this failure is the lack of a comprehensive strategy that is very frank and honest in identifying the sources of threat and identifying clear objectives and mechanisms that would enable us to move towards the solution. So conflicts are many, breakthroughs are limited, and that is why we need to come together and we need to speak together and we need to work together with a view to ensuring that we have at least a path towards resolving many of those conflicts. I mentioned the interconnectedness of those conflicts, and they are interconnected. Any conflict in this part of the world is affecting all of us, and it's leading and it's feeding into other conflicts that we are seeing happening. If I start with the pandemic, something that is a global challenge, and I think we all agree that this global challenge requires global action as well. The pandemic is not just affecting the health of our people, it's affecting our economy, the psychology of our nations, it's having social, political, security, economic implications as well that can only be solved if we work together, and if we plan together, and if we execute those plans together. His Majesty King Abdullah II has been speaking of reglobalization as a means to address this pandemic and its consequences, and by that is to looking at the shortcomings of our global system with a view to improving it rather than walking away from it. Multilateralism is the best mechanism that we have for addressing this conflict, and I think this is a time for us to revisit our ability to cement this multilateral work and work together towards tackling this conflict. Next year, again, a theme that has been consistent in His Majesty's approach to the issue is food insecurity. The disruption in the supply chain that has been caused by Corona, given the many conflicts that we have as well, is going to make food security a major challenge going forward. The only way to deal with it, again, is to work together, come up with regional pacts that would enable all of us to complement each other's abilities and be able to pool resources and move forward towards addressing this problem. I think what has been lacking in terms of addressing the other conflicts that have been plaguing this region is consistency and clarity on what needs to be done and what the solutions are. And I start with the oldest of conflict, the core source of conflict in the region, which is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. This is the source of the greatest part of tension that we've seen in our region, and it has fed into other conflicts that continue to exist. We all know what the ultimate answer to this problem is. The two-state solution on the basis of June 4, 1967 lines would occupy Jerusalem as capital for an independent sovereign Palestinian state to live in peace and harmony with the state of Israel. That is an objective. Have we been moving towards it? No. Unfortunately, other conflicts have taken away from the focus, and even in efforts that are trying to solve the conflict, we've seen a deviation from that. If we do not solve this conflict, what is the alternative? The only alternative is the one-state reality. And if we come to a one-state reality, the question that all of us are going to have to answer in the international community, is it going to be another apartheid or is it going to be a democracy? And what are the challenges that would come with each of those solutions? So I think reality is we do have to bring back focus. Our efforts in Jordan has been geared towards creating political horizons, bringing the parties back together, sitting on the table with a view to re-engaging in negotiations that, on the basis of international law, that would take us towards that solution. Now, the new peace deals that Emirates and Bahrain have had with Israel, when we speak in Jordan, we speak with the credibility of a country, of a peacemaker, a country that has had a peace treaty with Israel for 26 years. And we're often asked, what are your views? And we say what we believe is right. It is going to depend on what Israel does next. If Israel sees those treaties as an incentive to go forward towards resolving the core conflict, which is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, then this will be a great leverage. And in addition, with the Jordanian, Egyptian, Israeli, Bahraini peace treaties, we'd be able to move forward towards producing the comprehensive just peace that is a necessity for all of us in the region. If it does not, then the conflict is not going to go away. By the end of the day, Palestinian Israelis are going to wake up in the morning and they are within meters and kilometers from each other. That is the challenge that we need to focus on. So we hope that we'll be able to leverage those deals to create traction towards solving the core conflict, which is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And realistically speaking, that's not going to happen if we continue to see expansion of settlements, building of settlements, demolition of homes, suffocation of people. That is not the path to peace. The path to peace is to sit around the table on the basis of international law, on the basis of the Arab Peace Initiative, to which all Arab countries are committed. All of us in the Arab world continue to say that the two-state solution is the path to that peace. All of us are committed to that, and all of us want to see traction to that. And we all know that we have to work with all our friends in the international community to be able to achieve that ultimate right of all citizens of the Middle East. I go to that again, other conflicts towards which we have not been seeing a strategy is the Syrian crisis. Syrian conflict is no longer about Syria and the Syrian people. We haven't had a comprehensive strategy to solve the conflict. It's all being looked at through the prism of regional and international rivalries. What we need to do is to bring it back, to bring focus back to solving the conflict, again, achieving a political solution that must and should preserve the unity of Syria, the integrity of the country, in order for us to be able to move forward. So the next challenge that we have is, can we come together, articulate a policy that instead of dealing with Syria in terms of ad hoc basis, that we come up with a strategy, realistic, a new approach that would ultimately solve the crisis and stop the tragedy that has emanated from it. My country is host to 1.3 million Syrians. We have 367 kilometers of border with Syria. That has been a source of threat with smuggling of drugs, of weaponry, the cost to us of having to protect the long space has been enormous for us, in addition to the impact of refugees and the impact of the lack of disruption of trade across Syria into Europe and elsewhere. So again, if we want to talk about conflict resolution, we need to face reality and say, we do not have a strategy, we must have a strategy. And in articulating the strategy, we in the neighborhood should be involved. It is incomprehensible that in all the international fora that we see addressing Syria, the Arab countries are not there. By the end of the day, Syria is an Arab country. We are the neighbors of Syria. We're paying the highest cost of the conflict, and it just does not make sense that we're not on the table and we're not playing a larger role in efforts to bring about a resolution to that conflict. So we need a strategy, we need a collective Arab role, and we need to move and we need to bring it back to what matters, which is Syria and the Syrian people, and addressing all the horrific consequences that has come out of that conflict. And in terms of Arab role, I would also say the same about the tension in the Gulf region, in the Arab Gulf. No Arab country wants bad relations with Iran. We all want to have good neighborly relations with Iran. For that to happen, those relations need to be based on international law and respecting the interests of the other, non-interference in the affairs of the other. And that said, we believe that any future engagement with Iran, and we believe there should be engagement because dialogue, we believe, is the best way and the only way to effectively resolve conflicts, but the Arabs need to be, again, should have a seat on the table. Our interests and our concerns collectively as Arabs should also be taken into account, and by that I mean intervention in our affairs, meddling in our affairs, and other policies that have been counter to the stability and security that we want. And when we talk about security, security of the Gulf is inherent part of our collective security in the region. So that is something that I think we also need to keep our eyes on as we move forward and see what the coming period is going to unveil in terms of new approaches and new policies. And I can go on and on and on, but I think one of the major sources of threat is foreign intervention in Arab affairs, and not to blame others. We also have a lot to be blamed for because we need to come together, we need to sit together, we need to identify what is important for us, and we need to drive the discussion and drive the discourse and articulate our own approach and assume our own responsibility towards our region. We cannot leave our region to others to manage, and we need to work with our friends and allies, and of which there are many, and come together and work that conflict. So we as Arabs need to assume our responsibility as well and contribute to the articulation of policies and the implementation of solutions that would help us address all those conflicts. I want to speak also about Iraq a little bit, if my dear friend Minister Fuad would allow me. What we see in Iraq is a government that is trying very hard to redress the consequences of years of conflict. The success of this government in implementing its program of reconstruction, stabilization, bringing and building an all-inclusive political system is key to the stability of the whole region. To succeed in doing that, we need to help the Iraqi government with its reconstruction and rebuilding plans. We need to make sure that Iraq does not become yet again a battleground for fighting out regional agendas and international agendas. And because if we do not do that, then we risk the stability of Iraq, and if we risk the stability of Iraq, we're risking the stability of the whole region. Iraq has achieved a major victory against ISIS, but we need to complete that. The only way we complete it is by making sure that we stabilize the political system and bring about tangible improvements in the lives of people. And for that to happen, we need to immune Iraq from the repercussions of regional tensions that are affecting it. That is another area that I think is very important for all of us to be aware of. We've got Yemen, we've got Libya, the list is so long, and that's why, as I said, I mean, our record in conflict resolution has not really been one to be proud of as a region. But I think the answer to all of that is, one, realize how interconnected all those conflicts are. Number two is, again, to have a holistic approach to those problems that factors in the particularity of each conflict, but the underlying reasons for them are pretty much tied together. So we need to have clarity on objective, we need to be realistic, and we need to put the interest of the region and where it should be and give it the priority it deserves. Of course, our region is key to the global stability, and therefore cooperation and coordination with our allies and friends internationally is key. But I think, once again, we need to have clarity, we need to identify an agenda, and we need to all work together towards developing that agenda. And that applies to all those conflicts, and it also applies as well to terrorism, which is a threat that is to all of us. The war on terror is our collective war, and I think to win this war, we need to, again, address the conditions that allow it to grow. Terrorism grows and thrives in areas of conflict. It preys on despair, it preys on the lack of opportunity and the lack of hope. So, to tackle terrorism, yes, we need to defeat it on the battleground. We need to coordinate security-wise to make sure that the terrorist groups cannot pose a security threat to all of us. We need to focus on the virtual world because that's where they're grouping. And we need also to win the ideological battle. And to do so, we need to speak one language, that the war with ISIS is not a war between Islam and the rest of the world. It is a war between Islam and the rest of the world against those thugs, Khawarij, outlaws, who are outside our common humanity and certainly have nothing to do with Islam. So terminology is important here. We cannot continue to speak of Islamic terror. We need to speak of takfiris, we need to speak of khawarij, we need to speak of thugs, outlaws, who are an enemy to all of us. Because what the terrorists want is for all of us to fall into the trap of accepting this war as a war between civilizations, West and East. So that is very, very important as well. And I think we have the Aqaba process in Jordan, a process that His Majesty has launched many, many years ago with a view to having a holistic approach to fighting terrorism as well. Holistic in terms of geography, because if you get the terrorists in Syria and you don't get them in Iraq, they're going to move there and group. Get them in Iraq and Syria, you don't get them in Libya, they're going to move there and regroup. So geography is key, but also holistic in terms of theme, that we tackle the military threat, which has diminished a lot with ISIS losing its control territorially in Syria and Iraq, the security threat, which is still potent, and we do see ISIS and Al-Qaeda trying to re-emerge, but most importantly, long-term, the ideological threat. So ultimately, to solve all those conflicts, we need to think together, we need to plan together, and we need to act together, because if we do not do that, we will not improve our very sad record in conflict resolution in this part of the world. And thank you so much.
Mentioned in dispatches, so to speak, could I start off with His Royal Highness Turki Al Faisal?
Thank you very much. Dr. Muhib, thank you for your presentation. I have 3 questions for you, if I may. One, has the Taliban ended their relationship with Al-Qaeda? And number 2, has Iran continued to provide support to the Taliban while it has an embassy in Kabul? And number 3, is it possible to demarcate the so-called Durand line with Pakistan? And I prefer to call it the Pashtun line.
Thank you very much. A model of crisp questioning. To our young leader also from Morocco now, Imru Al-Qais Tala Jibril.
Thank you, Mr. Chipman. My question and comment is directed at Minister Safadi. So it is a well-known fact in the next 10 years, the MENA region or the Gulf will have extreme water scarcity. And that is a really well-known scientific fact. And in the case of Syria, for example, it was one of the, some academics argued it was one of the direct or indirect factors leading to the protests, right? So my question to you, since that you've said that we have a really bad track record in terms of conflict resolution, can we at least get better in terms of conflict prevention through that prism? So I'm not talking about just creating another regional organization where we're not going to collaborate about water management, but can we at least leverage technology such as blockchain to actually share that burden together and at least prevent conflict so we can deal with the current resolution of conflict as of right now? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, I'll read out a couple of questions that we've received from abroad. First, from Washington, the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington. Security conflicts in the Middle East are not just playing out across hard borders, but also within cyberspace. What measures are needed within cyberspace and the region's digital infrastructure to help support stabilization and conflict resolution? And this one in particular to Deputy Prime Minister Safadi from London. You were admirably precise in your conditional assessment of the Abraham Accords. Can I ask you nonetheless to reflect a bit further on lessons from Jordan's quarter century of formalized peace with Israel? Has peace between Israel and its 2 closest neighbors been a positive factor in relation to the Israel-Palestine conflict? And back to the floor, could I ask Omar Al-Mutawa?
Thank you, Your Excellencies, for sharing your vision to approach conflict. My question relates to the role of youth. How is your government investing in youth and their energies to become agents of change in the near future? Thank you.
And Giselle Khouri.
I want to ask His Excellency Ayman Safadi. You said that one state in Palestine for two populations will conduct two apartheid system. Is the two-state in Palestine still realistic after 30 years of Oslo, after Abraham deal, and the situation in the Arab world?
And Yara Ahmed.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies. For Dr. Fayed Hussein, how is Iraq going to address the Iranian-backed militias with the ongoing bombings that are currently occurring in Iraq, and how are you going to integrate those militias in the army when their own agenda is conflicting with the agenda of the state? Thank you.
And from Israel, Amos Yadlin.
Thank you for this very interesting and insightful presentation to the Deputy Prime Ministers and the National Security Advisor. My question is to Deputy His Highness Safadi. Assuming the miracle will happen and Israel and Palestine will have peace, it's a miracle. Why do you think that the rest of the Middle East problems will go away? The war in Yemen, the civil war in Syria, the collapse of Lebanon, the civil war in Libya, the Kurdistan issue, the threat of Iran. Why all this? Why you put the Palestinian-Israeli conflict on top of all this bloody, very difficult to resolve conflict? Thank you.
And Barak Madin.
Thank you very much for the panel. Two crisp, hopefully, questions. The first is related to the U.S. recent elections and the new administration. It's a question to the panel. Can we hear more on how do you think, or what the implications might be of the new administration on conflict dynamics and efforts? The second, more specifically, relates to basically, the increased voices on having a regional structure or regional organization for security in the Arab world, or in this part of the world, an Arab NATO of sort. The question is simple. How wise do you think the increased securitization will actually reflect on conflict and conflict resolution efforts in the region? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And General Tom Beckett.
Thank you. Commerce can often be...
So, the European role. Ayman, over to you.
Thank you so much. And if I miss any of them, there was quite a few. Let me start with the question from our colleague from Morocco on the issue of water. Look, in Jordan, we do relate and identify with this problem. We're the second most arid country on earth. I think the first country is our brothers in Bahrain. So we do realize the need to focus our efforts on trying to create new water resources, ensure the most efficient utilization of current water resources. And again, the answer to this is regional cooperation. If you talk about desalination, if you talk about other big projects that would render any such approach feasible, you need to approach that on a mass scale. And that would entail a regional approach to this problem as well, because even in areas of conflict, where you have conflicts over the right of water use, even with the most equitable distribution of water, you would still have shortage, and the region would still need to work together to create new resources for water, to introduce technology to ensure more efficient use, and so on and so forth. And look, the reality is the Middle East, to a great extent, is a region only in name. If we talk about regional cooperation institutions that would allow us to really address important issues that would lead partly to conflict prevention, that would create opportunity, that would make sure that we offer the future that our youth deserve, we need to work together collectively, because everything that happens in the region has implications for each and every one of us. And Minister Zayani and I and many of our colleagues, Saudi Foreign Minister as well, at lunch we're having a conversation about how do we make the Arab League more efficient. All of us think of the Arab League as that one annual session when foreign ministers get together and we start talking out the issues that we have. But under the Arab League, supposedly, there are organizations that have to do with science, with the labor market, with trade, We have free trade agreements in the Arab world that is greatly unimplemented. So how do we come together and again, think together, plan together, execute together, identify sources of threat, identify opportunities, and pool our resources with a view to making sure that we come up with mechanisms that can help us address all of that. So I think a lot of lacking in terms of building systematic, structural mechanisms that allow us to plan and address the challenges that we have, whether in terms of shortages of food security, water, improving education, better governance, or in terms of creating opportunity for the youth and making sure that our youth, which is the largest percentage of our populations, are equipped to deal with the challenges of what's going to be definitely more competitive eras going forward. So that is something that I think is something that, again, we can do much better work with if we build the institutions that are necessary to make sure that we identify effective mechanisms going forward. And again, if we learn in the Arab world to make sure that realize the interdependence that we have and immune economic, scientific, health cooperation from the politics and the problems of politics that quite often leave an impact on our ability to cooperate as such. On the issue of the Jordan-Israel relations and the viability of the two-state solution going forward, because they're kind of related. Look, as I said, we've had a peace treaty for 26 years. Our commitment to comprehensive, just peace in Jordan is unwavering, because we have been in Jordan at the receiving end of every crisis in this part of the world. And certainly we've been at the receiving end of the failure to achieve a just and lasting Middle East peace. So we do have an interest in making sure that we move towards that peace, but we also know what it takes to achieve that peace. And we know what it takes to achieve that peace is to have the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people fulfilled and the concerns of the Israelis addressed as well, so that we come up with a peace deal that would address the legitimate rights of both peoples and countries, the right of the Palestinians to freedom and independent statehood, and the right of Israel to security. And by the way, and His Royal Highness Prince Turki is here, the Arab Peace Initiative is, we believe, still yet the most comprehensive offer to achieve a lasting peace between Israel and all Arab neighbors and for normal ties, with, again, a recipe for the makings of that just and lasting and comprehensive peace that people will accept. And part of the lessons learned from our peace treaty with Israel is that in order for peace to be lasting and comprehensive and impactful in a meaningful, positive way, people have to embrace it. And in order for people to embrace it, they need to see that it does address the injustice to which the Palestinian people are still subjected. And as such, people-to-people peace is more than just a piece of paper. People-to-people peace is to show respect, is to show that you understand the problems of the other, is to stand up against injustice, is to end occupation, is to create opportunity. So we can talk for a long time, but I'll just give you one example. 26 years into the peace treaty between Jordan and Israel, our trade to the West Bank is north of $120 million compared to $4 billion of Israeli exports to the West Bank market. Why is that? Because of quotas imposed. So there are a lot of issues that when we signed the peace treaty in 1994, it was part of an ecosystem where the Palestinians have signed Oslo, Syrians were engaged in negotiations, our Egyptian brothers have signed a peace treaty before. It was a peace signed on the formula of land for peace formula, and it was geared towards achieving a comprehensive peace. That peace did not reach its potential because we failed to achieve that comprehensive and just peace that would allow us to enable all our resources together. And to the issue of the two-state solution being viable or not, truth, unilateral measures in terms of confiscation of land, demolition of homes, building and expansion of settlements is making the two-state solution less and less viable every day in. But the question is, do we throw the white towel, or do we keep working together with all our partners and friends on trying to ensure that the horizon for that peace remains there, because the alternative is bleak to all of us. So yes, there are challenges to the two-state solution, but as of yet, there is no alternative to it. And again, The alternative is a one-state reality with all the challenges that it's going to present, and it will not achieve the comprehensive, just, lasting peace that we in Jordan have been committed, both in words and in deeds, for it. And to the question is why the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is the core cause of conflict. I can go on and on for that, but I'll try and limit my remarks to, number one, it is the oldest conflict in the region. Number two, it defined the narrative and the course of events in the region for the most part of the 20th century. Number three, it is the only conflict that is caused by an occupation that continues with us till today. The conflict in Libya or the conflict in Syria do not cancel out identities. They are conflict within people, within a country. Ultimately, it's an issue of governments, it's an issue of sharing of power, it's an issue of creating a system that is all-inclusive, that would allow all the peoples of those countries to live equally and in peace. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict is about canceling the national identity of the Palestinian people. It is therefore an existential threat to the Palestinian people. And it is a conflict that resonates from Jordan to Morocco and from Afghanistan to Indonesia, because it does have components that go beyond just the national identity of the Palestinian people. It also has to do with Al-Aqsa and with Jerusalem, and no issue is more potent across the whole Arab and Muslim world than the issue of Al-Aqsa and Jerusalem. So the list is long, but in short, this is a conflict that has caused tremendous amount of injustice that it still exists till today. It's a conflict that threatens, that suffocates the national identity of the people and deprives them of the fundamental right to self-determination. And it is a conflict that has repercussions and implications that has shaped our past and will continue to shape the future. And therefore, the way we see it in Jordan is that the only way to resolving this conflict is to find a formula where it will be live and let live, where occupation ends, a Palestinian state emerges, lives in peace, in security, in harmony with an Israel that is secure and that is accepted in this part of the world, and then we move forward. The conflict in Syria can take 5 more years to come, 10 more years to come, but ultimately Syria as a nation, as an identity, is not under question here. With the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, it is, and that is why it is extremely important. On the issue of Jordan, Iraq, and I think one of our colleagues asked about the pipeline. I think we are having tremendously effective mechanism in terms of cooperation between Jordan and Iraq, along with our Egyptian brethren. So we have the trilateral mechanism, which is, by the way, is a mechanism that seeks to achieve that economic integration, giving the history of that economic cooperation that exists between the two countries. It is something that we're doing for the interest of the three of us and the whole region. And we hope it is a kind of cooperation, structured, institutionalized, that would be a block in building a broader cooperation. Again, we all realize how interconnected we are. Ultimately, we want this kind of cooperation to exist among all our countries. I was just in a meeting with the Secretary General of the Gulf Council, and we're talking about, again, the interconnectedness and the need for the GCC, Jordan, Morocco, Egypt to come together and work together, because the truth is, yes, we are like-minded countries, and yes, we are countries that have tremendously strong strategic relations, and yes, we all need to work together, because a lot of the threats that we face are common threats, and our ability to counter them will be much increased if we work together. So that's an example of a regional cooperation that we hope will expand to include all Arab countries in the region, because the benefits will be common to all. And there are challenges that, with electricity, we have extra electricity in Jordan that we can provide. Iraq doesn't have it. We can link the energy. Iraq has the oil. We can have the pipeline that will give Iraq the alternative to export oil, and that Jordan and Egypt would benefit. Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Gulf are linking electricity from the Basra part of Iraq, but the southern part of Iraq, we're linking from the east side of Iraq. Ultimately, we have a connection. We're talking about railroads that would connect the Gulf into Jordan and through Jordan into Syria and Europe. So all these are kind of projects that are really rooted in belief that we do need to build the structures and mechanisms that are lasting, that are sustainable of regional cooperation. And the last question, if I remember correctly, is the question about the role of Europe. We do believe that Europe has a tremendous role to play in this part of the world. Europe is an historical partner to the region. It does have a great understanding. And when I speak of Europe, by the way, I still include the UK in it because we still see it as such. So there's a tremendous historical effort and experiences to build on. Vis-a-vis the peace process, Jordan, Egypt are engaged right now in a process with Germany and with France to try and see how we can create political horizon for bringing the Israelis and the Palestinians together around the table so that we can restart negotiations on the basis of international law towards solving that conflict. Whether in Libya, whether in Syria, Europe has a tremendous role to play, and we do have a strong partnership, and we're looking forward to a stronger EU role in that, and not just in terms of politics, but also in terms of economy. The experience of institution building in Europe, the experience of that regional integration is something from which we can benefit, and it is something that we are in talks with our European friends about, with a view to, again, making sure how we can interact. I was just in Spain not too long ago as I co-chair the Euromed forum with Joseph Borrell, the EU High Rep, and it was 49 countries talking about, you know, what is it that we can do together to address many of the issues that our younger colleagues here have spoken of, and it's clearly where they're looking at. How do we create opportunity? How do we create jobs? How do we better our educational systems? How do we ensure better health system? And how do we ensure, you know, a regional kind of integration that allow for all that to happen? And if I may add to the challenges that we've just listed, and unfortunately in the Middle East, you always speak of challenges, speak of opportunities as well, and there are a lot of opportunities. We have the largest number of young people probably anywhere in the world in this region, and that is where we need to focus. How do we create opportunity, and how do we move forward with creating conditions that would be conducive to unleashing their tremendous potential that we're seeing manifested in many aspects. And by the way, again, we're talking today, I think we were in Onga the year before last year, because this year we did not have Onga. And we moved from one session to the other about the Middle East, and it's all about conflicts, all about challenges. And I was thinking, you know what, maybe next year we should have a session about opportunities in the region and really showcase what our youth are doing in terms of art, sciences, entrepreneurship, and just have a session and call it Middle East Think Positive and show what the potential of our people and our region is. And that's something we need to bring to even such conferences like that, is not just talk about conflict, but talk about opportunities and talk the tremendous potential that our youth has and our region has if we are able, again, just to plan and work together. Thank you.
Ayman, thank you very much for that. You can see how well received that set of remarks has. It's been also from the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq and our National Security Advisor. I can say for our part, I will take your recommendation. We've started already, as you know, with a Young Leaders program here. Some of the best questions asked of the ministers throughout the day here have been from some of our young leaders, and we will take to heart for the next year's Manama Dialogue to find a way to explore the new opportunities that this region promises from the point of view of the younger generation, and engage in that way. And from an institutional point of view, I can say we're delighted to have our headquarters of the IISS in London. You may not have been in the room when I was able to announce it, but starting next year, we will also have a IISS Europe office in the Federal Republic of Germany in Berlin. And so we will be able to also do our best to continue to engage Europe and the Middle East